The last time I saw my sister's face before that night, she was smiling across a Thanksgiving table. She watched me lose everything. The next time she was unconscious on my operating table with a ruptured spleen and 63 minutes to live. I unclipped the silver watch from my scrub pocket and set it on the instrument tray. Then I told my team 4 words. Let's bring her back. 5 years earlier, my mother stood in front of our entire family and said 6 words that rewrote my life. She wasn't cut out for it. She was talking about me, and she was wrong, but not for the reasons you think. She was wrong because the daughter she dismissed became the chief of trauma surgery. She led the team at the hospital where her favorite daughter was bleeding out, and the woman who proved it was not me. It was my dead grandmother, a sealed envelope, and a forensic handwriting analysis. They had been waiting in a lawyer's briefcase for 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Before I continue, please like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. My name is Camille, and I am 32 years old. I am a trauma surgeon. I save lives for a living, and until 3 weeks ago, my own family thought I was a college dropout who waited tables. Let me take you back 10 years to the house where the lies began, and the kitchen table where only one daughter was ever welcome. I grew up in a house that smelled like lemon disinfectant and leather-bound journals. My father, Kenneth Harlow, was an internist with a small but respected practice on the east side of town. My mother, Lorraine, had never worked a clinical day in her life, but she spoke about medicine as if she had invented it. She introduced herself at school events as Dr. Harlow's wife. She arranged the family portrait above the fireplace, so my father's white coat was always visible in the frame. Reputation was her oxygen. Without it, she could not breathe. There were 2 daughters in that house, and there were 2 sets of rules. My sister Jolene was 22 months younger, but you would never have known it from the way my mother treated her. Jolene had the easy laugh, the quick wit, the face that looked like Lorraine's at 23. When Jolene brought home a B+ in biology, my mother called 3 relatives. When I brought home an A, she said, "Well, that's what we expect from you." Expectation is a strange kind of punishment. You clear the bar and no one claps. You miss it by an inch, and the whole house hears about it. My father was quieter about the divide, but silence has a shape. On Saturday mornings, he took Jolene to his clinic. He let her sit in the consultation room and showed her how to read a blood pressure cuff. I asked once if I could come. He looked at Lorraine, and Lorraine looked at me, and nobody said yes or no, so I stayed home. I learned early that in our family an unanswered question was always a no. The person who said yes was my grandmother. Estelle Harlow had been an emergency room nurse for 31 years before she retired. She lived alone in a small blue house on Birch Lane, 14 minutes from our front door. Every Wednesday after school, I walked to her house, and she taught me things no one else thought I needed to know. How to read a patient chart, how to scrub in elbows to fingertips 2 full minutes, never rush the second hand, how to stay calm when the room is not calm. She had a silver pocket watch that she carried through every shift, a gift from her own mother. It had a hairline scratch on the glass and a second hand that ticked 1 beat too loud. She let me hold it while she talked. Time is the one thing you cannot argue with, she told me once, standing at her kitchen counter with flour on her wrists. People will lie to you, Camille. They will rearrange the facts to suit the story they need. But time keeps a record, and records do not forget. I was 14. I did not understand her then. I would eventually. Jolene and I both applied to the same medical school. The acceptance letters arrived on the same Tuesday in April, mine at 7 in the morning, hers at noon. My mother set the table for a celebration dinner that night. 4 plates, candles, the good silverware. She raised her glass and said, "To Jolene." My father repeated it. I looked down at my own glass, half full of sparkling cider, and waited. The toast never expanded. My name was in the same envelope, the same program, the same entering class. But at that table on that night, there was only one daughter going to medical school. Grandma Estelle called me later. I sat on the porch steps and told her about the toast. She was quiet for 9 seconds, I counted, and then she said, "Camille, listen to me. You are going to be a surgeon. Not because they believe in you, because I do, and that is enough." She mailed me the silver watch the following week. It arrived in a small wooden box lined with blue velvet with a note in her careful handwriting. For every shift, for every patient, for every time they tell you no. I clipped it to my coat pocket on the first day of medical school. I did not know it then, but that watch would outlast every promise my family ever made. If you've ever been the one who was expected to succeed, but never celebrated, stay with me. What happened next broke the family in half, but the woman who believed in me most would leave behind something none of them expected. Medical school sorted us within the first semester. Not by grades, by temperament. Anatomy lab started on a Thursday morning in September. I remember the smell before I remember anything else. Formaldehyde and cold metal and the faint sweetness of preservation fluid that clung to your hair for hours after you left. 24 tables, 4 students per cadaver. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made your teeth ache if you stood directly underneath them. I was steady. My hands did not shake when I made the first incision along the midline. My lab partner, a tall woman from Michigan named Priya, looked at me afterward and said, "You've done this before." I had not. But I had spent 4 years at Grandma Estelle's kitchen table, learning to hold still when everything inside me wanted to move. That was the skill nobody taught in lecture halls, the ability to be calm when calm was the last thing your body wanted. Jolene was in a different section. Pre-med, not the medical program itself. She needed 2 more semesters of prerequisites before she could apply to the MD track. Lorraine called this a formality. She told relatives at Thanksgiving that both her daughters were in medical school, which was technically 1.5 lies. Jolene was on the path. I was already there. But in my mother's version, Jolene was always half a step ahead, even when the math said otherwise. I saw my sister at the campus coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday between classes. She ordered a vanilla latte with oat milk extra shot, and she always sat by the window so people walking past could see her with a textbook open. I am not saying she did not study. I am saying she studied the way someone studies, when they know they are being watched posture first, content second. By February, Jolene was failing organic chemistry. I know this because she called me at 11 at night and asked me to explain nucleophilic substitution over the phone. I spent 45 minutes walking her through the mechanism. She said, "Thanks, Cam," and hung up. She did not call again for 3 weeks, and when she did, it was to ask about another exam. I helped her every time. That is the thing about being the invisible daughter. You become very good at being useful, because useful is the closest you get to loved. My father visited campus once that year. He took Jolene to lunch at an Italian restaurant 2 blocks from the science building. I know because she posted a photo. Kenneth was in a pressed blue shirt, and Jolene leaned into him with a smile that belonged on a brochure. The caption said, "Like father, like daughter." I saw it in the library at 9:14 in the evening, between 2 chapters of pathophysiology. I closed the app and went back to the textbook. There was no point in counting the things I did not receive. The person who noticed was Corinne. My father's younger sister was 53 at the time and unmarried. She taught piano and lived alone in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner on Maple Street. The family called her the eccentric one when they were being polite, and poor Corinne when they were not. She had no children, no husband, no career that Lorraine considered respectable. At family dinners, she sat at the far end of the table next to me, and we shared the breadbasket like 2 people on the same lifeboat. One Sunday in March, the whole family gathered at our parents' house for Kenneth's 56th birthday. Lorraine had made pot roast. Jolene arrived late and kissed Kenneth on the cheek. Then she launched into a story about a professor who said she had real clinical instinct. Lorraine beamed. Kenneth nodded. I cut my meat into 9 equal pieces and said nothing. Corinne leaned over and whispered, "You know, your grandmother once told me that the quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the most attention." I looked at her. She winked. It was a small thing, a half-second movement of one eyelid, and the first time in months that someone at that table had acknowledged I existed without needing something from me. After dinner, I helped Lorraine wash the dishes. She handed me a serving bowl and said, "Jolene is doing so well. Dr. Trent says she could be top of her section if she applies herself." I did not point out that I was already top of mine. I dried the bowl and set it in the cabinet 3rd shelf behind the gravy boat that we only used at Christmas. "Your father and I have been talking." Lorraine continued, her hands still in the soapy water. We want to set up a fund to help Jolene with her tuition next year. The pre-med program is expensive, and she has been working so hard. What about my tuition? I asked. Lorraine paused. Not a long pause, 2 seconds, maybe 3. You have your scholarships, Camille. Jolene needs a little extra support. You understand. I understood. I understood the way you understand gravity, not from an explanation, but from falling so often that the pull stopped surprising you. That spring, Jolene's grades did not improve. I heard fragments through the family phone chain. She had dropped a lab course, switched an elective, and requested a tutor through the academic support office. Lorraine reframed every setback as strategy. She's being smart about her course load. Kenneth said nothing, which in our family meant agreement. Corinne called me on a Tuesday night in April. How are you holding up? She asked, and it was such a simple question that I almost cried. Almost. I told her I was fine. She said, You sound like your grandmother. She always said she was fine too, right up until she wasn't. I did not know what Corinne meant by that. Not yet. Jolene smiled through every dinner that year. I did not know what she was planning behind that smile. The call came on a Wednesday in October, 4:17 in the afternoon. I was in the anatomy lab finishing a dissection of the brachial plexus when my phone buzzed in my locker across the hall. I did not check it until 6. By then, there were 4 missed calls from Lorraine and 1 text message. Come home for Thanksgiving. We need to talk about your decision. My decision. I read those 2 words 3 times under the fluorescent lights of the locker room, and I could not make them mean anything that made sense. I had not made any decision. I was in my 2nd year of medical school, carrying a 3.91 GPA. I ran on 4 hours of sleep and a kind of determination that grows only in people never given permission to stop. What decision was she talking about? I called back. Lorraine answered on the 2nd ring. Your sister told us everything, she said. Her voice was the one she used at parent-teacher conferences, measured public, built for an audience even when there was none. Camille, how could you do this to your father? Do what? Drop out. After everything we sacrificed, after everything your father's name means in this town. The floor tilted. Not physically, I was standing perfectly still in a locker room that smelled like betadine and rubber gloves, but something inside my chest shifted the way a shelf shifts when you remove the one book that was holding everything up. I didn't drop out, I said. Jolene showed us the withdrawal form. It has your name on it, Camille, your signature. I did not have a withdrawal form. I had never signed one, never requested one, never so much as walked past the registrar's office with the thought of leaving. But Lorraine's voice had already sealed the verdict. She was not calling to ask, she was calling to sentence. Come home for Thanksgiving, she repeated. Your father deserves an explanation. I went. I do not know why I went. Maybe because part of me still believed that if I showed up and spoke clearly enough, the truth would be obvious. That is the kind of thinking you have when you are 22, and still believe that families operate on evidence. The dining room was full when I arrived. Kenneth at the head of the table, Lorraine to his right, Jolene across from her, Uncle Bernard and Aunt Phyllis, Cousin Drew and his wife, my great-aunt Sandra, who was 81 and hard of hearing but never missed a holiday, Corinne at the far end, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. 11 people in total, 4 candles burning on the centerpiece, the smell of roasted turkey and rosemary, and something underneath it all that I would later recognize as ambush. We made it through the salad course. Lorraine passed the breadbasket and asked Cousin Drew about his accounting firm. Kenneth carved the turkey with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years cutting things open. Jolene sipped her wine and avoided my eyes. I sat in my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen door, the one that made it easy to clear plates without anyone having to ask. Lorraine set down her fork between the main course and dessert. The sound of metal on porcelain was small but deliberate, like a judge tapping a gavel. Camille, she said, we think it's time you were honest with this family. 11 faces turned toward me. Jolene looked at her napkin. Corinne looked at me. I haven't been dishonest, I said. The school confirmed your withdrawal. Lorraine's voice did not waver. Jolene tried to talk you out of it. She told us you wanted to leave to follow that boyfriend of yours, what was his name, and she begged you to stay. She was heartbroken. I looked at Jolene. My sister was 22, sitting in the chair my mother had chosen for her and wearing a blouse my mother had bought. She was telling a lie my mother needed to believe. Jolene's hands were steady. Her face was sympathetic the way a newscaster's face is sympathetic, professional, practiced empty behind the performance. That is not what happened, I said. Kenneth, Lorraine turned to my father. Tell her. My father looked at his plate. He had carved the turkey into perfect even slices. Now he stared at them as if they contained an answer he could not find anywhere else. His mouth opened. It closed. He picked up his water glass, drank, and set it down. This isn't the time, Camille, he said quietly. 6 words. He chose 6 words. None of them were mine. Lorraine straightened her shoulders. She wasn't cut out for it, she said, and her voice carried across the table the way a verdict carries across a courtroom final, public, unchallengeable. I told Kenneth when she was 16. Some people have the temperament. Jolene has it. Camille never did. If you've ever been judged by someone who never once looked at the evidence, drop the word truth into the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. Nobody spoke. Uncle Bernard examined his cranberry sauce. Aunt Phyllis touched her pearls. Cousin Drew's wife shifted in her chair. Great Aunt Sandra squinted, trying to follow the conversation she could only half hear. Corinne stared at Lorraine with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not sadness, but recognition. It was recognition. Someone who had watched the same pattern for 30 years and finally saw it land on someone else. I stood up. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate, left side, parallel to the fork, the way Lorraine had taught me when I was 6. I walked to the hallway closet and put on my coat. The silver watch was in the inside pocket. I felt its weight against my ribs, one beat too loud, like a second heartbeat that belonged to someone who had always believed in me. Camille. It was Kenneth. He had followed me to the front door. He stood 4 feet away, one hand on the banister, the other hanging at his side. His mouth opened again. I waited. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Drive safe, he said. I drove 211 miles back to campus that night. The highway was empty, and the radio was off, and the only sound was the heater pushing warm air against the windshield. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not pull over. I held the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I watched the white lane markers disappear under the hood, one after another, each one a small, quiet goodbye. Nobody called the next day, or the day after, or the day after that. I checked my phone 11 times on Friday, 8 times on Saturday, 4 on Sunday. By Monday, the count dropped to 2. By the following Monday, I stopped counting altogether. 5 years is a long time to be dead to the people who were supposed to love you. But the dead can build empires in silence. The first year was the hardest. Not because of the work was the only thing that made sense. Organic chemistry had rules. Pathophysiology had logic. The human body, for all its chaos, followed patterns that could be learned, memorized, anticipated. It was people who did not follow patterns. It was families. I moved out of my campus apartment and into a studio 14 blocks east, above a laundromat that ran its dryers until midnight. The rent was $640 a month, heat included. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like the state of Ohio. I taped my class schedule to the refrigerator and Grandma Estelle's note to the bathroom mirror. For every shift, for every patient, for every time they tell you no. I built a life out of the scraps that were left. I stopped checking my phone for their calls by January. By March, I stopped expecting them. By June, I understood the difference between those two things. The understanding sat in my chest, like a stone I would carry for years. Medical school does not care about your family. It cares about whether you can stand for 6 hours without eating and still identify the branches of the external carotid artery in the correct order. I could. I stood in operating rooms and watched attending surgeons open abdomens and repair damage that should have been fatal. And I learned something that Lorraine never taught me. Competence is its own kind of love. Quiet, unglamorous, immune to applause. The kind of love that shows up at 3 a.m. and does not leave until the bleeding stops. I graduated second in my class. Nobody from my family was in the audience. I wore the silver watch under my gown, clipped to the collar of my dress shirt. When they called my name, I walked across the stage with 212 people watching, and none of them related to me by blood. A woman I had never met, the mother of the student who graduated first, stopped me afterward in the parking lot and said, "You looked so calm up there. Your family must be very proud." I thanked her and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could start the engine. Residency at St. Albans Medical Center began the following July. Trauma surgery, 5 years of 90-hour weeks, 36-hour shifts, and the kind of fatigue that turns your bones into something softer than bone. I loved it. I loved the precision, the urgency, the way a trauma bay strips away everything that does not matter and leaves only the question, can you fix this? I could fix it. Again and again and again, I could fix it. The one person who kept me connected to the world I had left was Corinne. She called every Sunday at 9 in the morning without exception. Rain holidays the week she had bronchitis and could barely speak 9 o'clock. The phone rang and her voice came through like a radio signal from a country I used to live in. "Your mother redecorated the living room," she told me once early on. "Took down the family portrait, put up individual photos instead. Yours is not on the wall." "I know," I said, even though I had not known. Knowing and expecting are different muscles, and I had been training the second one for a long time. Corinne never pushed. She told me about her piano students, about the stray cat she fed on her fire escape, about the tulips she planted in a window box that never got enough sun. And she told me about Grandma Estelle. Estelle's memory began to slip in the 3rd year of my residency. Small things at first, a name misplaced, a stove burner left on the car keys, found in the freezer behind a bag of peas. Then larger things. She called Corinne Lorraine twice in one afternoon. She forgot the route to the grocery store she had driven to for 40 years. Kenneth arranged for a part-time aide. Lorraine arranged for the aide to report to her. "Your grandmother asks about you," Corinne said during one of our Sunday calls. "Not every time, but when she does, she is very clear. She says your name and she says, 'Tell her I kept the record.' I do not know what she means." I did not know either, not then. Estelle died on a Tuesday in November, 2 years before the night Jolene ended up on my operating table. She was 87. She died in the blue house on Birch Lane in the bedroom where she had slept for 43 years. The window was open because she always said hospitals smelled like fear, and she wanted her last air to smell like pine. I was not invited to the funeral. Corinne told me this in a voice so flat it sounded like she was reading a weather report. Lorraine said it would be too disruptive, that your presence would upset your father. I held the phone against my ear and stared at the ceiling of the on-call room, white tiles, one missing a dark square where something should have been. I let the silence fill the space where a scream would have been if I were a different kind of person. I sat on the floor of the hospital stairwell that night, between the 3rd and 4th floors, where the security cameras did not reach, and the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. I held the silver watch in both hands. I cried until my surgical mask was wet enough to wring out. 7 minutes. That was all I allowed myself. Then I washed my face, reclipped the watch, and walked into a trauma bay where a 19-year-old had been pulled from an overturned car. I saved his life. His mother hugged me in the hallway at 4 in the morning and said, "God sent you." I did not correct her. I did not say that nobody had sent me, that I had sent myself. Corinne mentioned the house on Birch Lane a few weeks later, almost in passing. "The lawyers say Estelle set up some kind of trust years ago, before the memory problems. Lorraine is furious because she cannot access it. Apparently the trustee is an attorney no one in the family has heard of." I filed that away the way I filed lab results noted stored, not yet actionable. I had a fellowship application to complete. A department was beginning to notice that the quiet resident in trauma could handle cases that made senior attendants pause. The fellowship came through. Johns Hopkins. 3 years in Baltimore, specializing in damage control surgery for polytrauma patients. I published 14 papers. I presented at 4 conferences. I stood behind podiums in cities I had never visited and spoke about hemorrhage protocols to rooms full of surgeons who called me Dr. Harlow and meant it. When I returned to St. Albans as chief of trauma surgery, the hospital put my name on the directory in the main lobby. White letters on a black background, 3rd floor East Wing. Dr. Camille Harlow, chief of trauma surgery. My first day, a young nurse named Theo helped me set up the office. He carried in a box of textbooks. He arranged the diplomas I was too tired to hang and plugged in a desk lamp that cast warm light across the room. "Dr. Harlow," he said, reading one of the framed certificates. "Johns Hopkins. That's serious." "It was a lot of coffee," I said. He laughed, and then he said something I was not expecting. "I've never seen anyone stay that calm under pressure. Were you always in trauma?" he asked, hanging the last diploma above the bookshelf. "Since day one," I said. "I never wanted anything else." He stepped back and looked at the wall. "Well, Dr. Harlow, your wall sure agrees with you." I thanked him. I did not tell him that my calm was not a gift, it was scar tissue. The body builds it over wounds that never fully close. After a while, you cannot tell the difference between strength and numbness. You just know that your hands do not shake, and in a trauma bay, that is enough. I gripped the phone. "Did she know?" I asked. "Did she know I became a surgeon?" "She knew," Corinne said. "I showed her your fellowship letter. She held it for a long time and said, 'That girl was never the one who quit.'" "Why didn't she tell them?" I asked. "Because she was building something better than an argument," Corinne said. "She was building a case." I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong by exactly one phone call. It came on a Thursday in December, 9:47 at night. I was in the attending lounge finishing a chart note on a motorcycle accident from earlier that afternoon. 26-year-old male open femur, fracture stable post-fixation, when the overhead pager crackled. "Trauma 1 to the bay. ETA 4 minutes. Female 29 motor vehicle collision, unrestrained passenger. GCS8. Suspected splenic laceration. Hemodynamically unstable." I closed the chart. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. I walked down the corridor at the pace I always walked, fast enough to matter, slow enough to think. Theo met me at the trauma bay doors with a yellow gown and a face shield. "Ambulance just radioed in," he said. "Passenger side T-bone at the Clarkfield intersection." Driver walked away. Passenger did not. The bay was bright. 7 people in position. 2 residents, 2 nurses, an anesthesiologist, a respiratory therapist, and me. The monitors hummed their flat, waiting hum. I unclipped the silver watch from my scrub pocket and set it on the instrument tray next to the number 10 scalpel. I always did this before a major case. Grandma Estelle's watch did not belong inside a sterile field, but I needed it where I could see it. 1 beat too loud. Steady when nothing else was. The stretcher came through the double doors at 9:51. I saw the hair first. Dark brown shoulder length matted with blood on the left side. Then the face. Swollen, lacerated across the left cheekbone, oxygen mask fogging with shallow breaths. The paramedic was calling out vitals, blood pressure, 82/54 heart rate, 138, 2 large bore IVs, running wide open. But his voice faded into the background, the way all sound fades. When your brain is processing something it is not prepared to process. Jolene, my sister, 29 years old, the girl who had ordered vanilla lattes by the window, the girl who had smiled through Thanksgiving, while my life collapsed around me like a building with no foundation. She was on my stretcher in my trauma bay, bleeding into her own abdomen at a rate that gave me approximately 63 minutes before her organs began to shut down. Theo looked at me. He did not know. Nobody in that room knew. Jolene was a name on a paramedic's report, a blood type on a wristband, a body that needed fixing. That was all she was allowed to be right now. "Fast exam," I said. My voice was level. "Let's see what we're working with." The ultrasound showed free fluid in the left upper quadrant. The spleen was ruptured, not a small tear, not a controlled bleed, but a grade 4 laceration with active hemorrhage into the peritoneal cavity. I estimated 800 milliliters already lost. The clock in my head started running the way it always does, not counting up, but counting down. "We're going to the OR," I said. "Call for 4 units of packed reds, 2 FFP. I want cell saver ready. Let's move." We moved. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor took 41 seconds. I spent those 41 seconds reviewing splenic anatomy I had learned 15 years earlier and honed in 100 real cases since. Splenic hilum, short gastric vessels, splenorenal ligament, The body does not care about history. It cares about blood flow and pressure, and whether the person holding the scalpel knows where to cut. The operation lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes. I performed a splenectomy with ligation of the splenic artery and a repair of a small diaphragmatic tear that the ultrasound had not shown. My hands did not shake. They never do. But somewhere between the second hour and the third, Jolene's pressure dropped to 71, and the anesthesiologist said, "We're losing ground, Dr. Harlow." I felt the silver watch on the instrument tray as though it were still clipped to my chest, 1 beat too loud, steady. "Give another unit," I said, "and 0.5 milligrams of epi. We're not losing her." We did not lose her. At 1:37 in the morning, I closed the final layer of fascia and stepped back from the table. Jolene's vitals had stabilized pressure 104 over 68 heart rate 92 urine output adequate. She would live. She would live because the sister Jolene had erased from medical school had spent 5 years becoming the one person in this city who could save her. I stripped off my gown in the scrub room and washed my hands for 2 full minutes, elbows to fingertips the way Grandma Estelle had taught me when I was 14. The water was too hot. I did not adjust it. The waiting room was at the end of the hall. Through the glass panel in the door, I could see 2 figures, Kenneth in a gray coat standing by the window, and Lorraine in the chair closest to the nurse's station. Her handbag was on her lap, and her posture was the same she used at charity galas. Upright, controlled. The posture of a woman who believed that appearance was a form of medicine. I pushed the door open. I was still in my scrubs. The blue fabric was wrinkled, and the left side was stained with Jolene's blood. My badge hung from a retractable clip on my chest pocket. Dr. Camille Harlow, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Lorraine saw me first. Her eyes went to my face, then down to the badge, then back to my face. I watched 11 seconds pass across her face, confusion, recognition, disbelief, and something harder beneath them that I couldn't name. Kenneth turned from the window. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone white at the temples, and his shoulders carried a slope that had not been there 5 years ago. He looked at me the way you look at a door you thought you had locked and find standing open. "Jolene is stable," I said. "She had a grade 4 splenic rupture. I performed a splenectomy and repaired a diaphragmatic tear. She's in recovery, and her vitals are holding. Barring complications, she should be moved to a step-down unit within 24 to 48 hours. Clinical language. Clean, specific, unburdened by the last 5 years. I delivered it the way I delivered every post-operative update, standing hands at my sides, eyes moving between them. This was my operating room, my department, my hospital. In here, the only title that mattered was the one on my badge." Lorraine did not say thank you. She looked at the badge again and said, "Why are you wearing that?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a candle that has just been blown out. Not, "How is she?" Not, "Thank you for saving my daughter's life." "Why are you wearing that badge?" As though the badge were the improbable thing. As though a surgeon saving a patient were less believable than a dropout saving a sister. "Because I earned it," I said. Kenneth opened his mouth, closed it. His hand moved toward me 2 inches, maybe 3, and then returned to his side. He looked at the floor the way he had looked at the turkey 5 Thanksgivings ago, searching for an answer in something that could not give one. She wasn't cut out for it. The phrase moved through me like a current, not from the outside, but from somewhere behind my sternum, a frequency I had been carrying for 5 years, without knowing I was still tuned to it. I did not say it out loud. I did not need to. The badge said everything the phrase had tried to bury. If you've ever saved someone who never believed in you, stay with me, because what happened next is the reason I am telling you this story. She did not say thank you. She said, "Why are you wearing that badge?" The waiting room at St. Albans was not designed for confrontations. It was designed for families who sit in plastic chairs and drink bad coffee and wait for someone in scrubs to tell them whether the worst is over. Beige walls. A television mounted in the corner playing the weather forecast on mute. A vending machine that sold granola bars and bottled water, and nothing that could fix what was actually broken. Lorraine stood up. She was shorter than I remembered, or maybe I was taller. 5 years will do that, not to your body, but to your sense of scale. The people who once towered over you shrink when you stop kneeling. "I asked you a question," she said. Her voice was the one I knew from childhood, the voice that expected answers, shaped like apologies. "That badge says Chief of Trauma Surgery. You dropped out of medical school, Camille." "Jolene told us. The school confirmed it. So I am going to ask you again. Why are you wearing that?" There were 2 nurses at the station behind me. I could feel them listening the way you feel. Weather change, not a sound, but a pressure shift. Dr. Samuels, the attending on call in the surgical ICU, had stepped into the hallway with a chart in his hand and stopped when he heard Lorraine's voice carry through the open door. "My daughter dropped out of medical school," Lorraine said louder now, adjusting her volume the way she adjusted her posture for the audience she assumed was always watching. "I don't know what kind of fraud she's running here, but I want to speak with someone in charge." Dr. Samuels walked in. He was 53 ex-Navy, built like a man who had spent 2 decades making decisions in rooms where hesitation costs lives. He looked at Lorraine, then at me, and then at the badge she was pointing at, as if it were evidence of a crime. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, "Dr. Harlow performed a flawless damage control laparotomy tonight on your daughter. She controlled a grade 4 splenic hemorrhage in conditions that would have challenged any surgeon in this state. She has been our chief of trauma surgery for 11 months, and before that, she completed a fellowship at Johns Hopkins that most surgeons spend a decade trying to qualify for." He paused. "I'm not sure what you mean by fraud, but I would suggest that this is not the evening to pursue that line of thinking." Lorraine's mouth opened and closed twice without producing a sound. In 32 years, I had never once heard my mother without an answer. She turned to Kenneth, the way she always turned to Kenneth, not for support, but for confirmation that her version of the world was still the correct one. "Did you know about this?" she said. Kenneth was standing by the window. The glass reflected the parking lot lights behind him, 4 orange circles floating in the dark like small distant suns. He looked at Lorraine. He looked at me. He looked at the floor. "I didn't," he said. "I swear I didn't." "Then why didn't you ask?" Lorraine's voice cracked on the last word. Not from sadness, from the specific fury of a person who discovers that a story she has told for 5 years has a hole in it large enough to walk through. 5 years, Kenneth, 5 years, and you never once called her. You never once checked. "Neither did you," he said quietly. That sentence landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Lorraine's jaw tightened. Kenneth turned back to the window. The weather forecast on the television cycled to the weekend outlook, partly cloudy highs in the mid-30s, a chance of snow. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that the room had not already said for me. My badge was on my chest. My sister's blood was on my scrubs. The 5 years between those 2 facts were not mine to explain. A nurse I did not recognize, young, probably afloat from another floor, approached me in the hallway outside. She had a clipboard in one hand and a look on her face that people get when they want to say something kind but are not sure if they are allowed. "Dr. Harlow," she said. "Is that your family in there?" "Yes," I said. She glanced at the door. "They don't seem to know you work here." The sentence was simple. 7 words, no judgment, no malice. But it opened a door in my chest that I had spent 5 years sealing shut, and for 3 seconds I could feel every holiday I had missed, every phone call that never came, every time I had walked through this hospital's front entrance, knowing that the letters on the lobby directory spelled a name my own parents did not associate with a doctor. "They don't," I said. "We've been out of touch." "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it the way strangers mean it, with the gentle inadequacy of someone who can see the wound but does not know its depth. I thanked her and walked to the attending lounge. The hallway was 112 steps. I had counted it once during a night shift, when counting was the only thing keeping me upright. The lounge was empty. The coffee machine gurgled a small asthmatic sound. I sat on the couch and put my elbows on my knees. I pressed my palms flat against my eyes until I saw red. The silver watch was back in my scrub pocket. I could feel it ticking against my chest. 1 beat too loud. Grandma Estelle's rhythm still keeping time in a world where everything she loved had been rearranged without her permission. I thought about Jolene in the recovery unit unconscious, breathing through a tube alive because of hands she had spent 5 years pretending did not belong to a doctor. I thought about Lorraine in the waiting room, standing in the ruins of a narrative she had constructed brick by careful brick. I thought about Kenneth. At the window reflected in glass, a man who had spent his whole life standing beside things without ever quite facing them. And I thought about Grandma Estelle. I kept the record. That was what Corinne said she repeated near the end when the names and the dates and the routes to the grocery store had all dissolved. But some things remained fixed in place, like pins in a map. I kept the record. I did not know that she had spent the last clear years of her mind assembling the proof that would rewrite every lie my sister had ever told. I pressed my hands harder against my eyes. The red turned to black. I breathed. I counted. 7 seconds in, 7 seconds out. Then Aunt Corinne called, and what she told me rearranged every memory I had. Corinne's voice on the phone was the steadiest I had ever heard it, not the easy calm people use when nothing is wrong. The careful, dry calm of someone who had carried something heavy for years and at last found a place to set it down. "I need to tell you about your grandmother's envelope," she said. I was still in the attending lounge. The coffee machine had stopped gurgling. The clock on the wall read 2:22 in the morning. The hospital was in its deep night hush, not silence, but a steady low hum of ventilators and IV pumps and footsteps on linoleum, the sound of a place that never sleeps because the people inside it are kept awake by need. "What envelope?" I said. "Estelle gave it to a lawyer 3 years before she died, before the memory started going. She told me about it once, on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember, because she had just come back from the bank and she was wearing her gray cardigan with the loose button on the left cuff. She said, 'Corinne, I have put everything in order. When the time is right, Camille will know.'" Corinne paused. I could hear her breathing slow, deliberate, the breathing of a woman who had practiced patience the way other people practice piano. "I didn't push her," Corinne continued. "Your grandmother was not a person you pushed. She moved at her own speed, and her speed was always exactly right. But she told me the lawyer's name, Margot Kessler, an attorney in Ridgemont, about 40 minutes from Birch Lane. Estelle found her on her own, no referral from Kenneth, no connection to the family. She wanted someone clean." "Clean," I repeated. Her word. She said the family had too many tangled threads, and she needed someone who would hold the scissors without asking permission. I sat forward on the couch. My scrubs were stiff with dried sweat and the faint metallic residue of a 3-hour surgery. The watch ticked in my pocket. Outside the window, the parking lot lights cast their orange circles on the asphalt, each one a small island of visibility in a field of dark. "Corinne," I said, "what is in the envelope?" "I don't know everything. Estelle never showed me the contents, but she told me 3 things. Corinne's voice shifted lower, more precise, as if she were reading from a list she had memorized years ago and reviewed every Sunday since. "1, she had a copy of the withdrawal form that was filed in your name at the medical school. She obtained it through a records request. 2, she had the form analyzed. The handwriting was not yours. 3, she wrote a letter, a full account dated and notarized, explaining what she believed happened and who she believed was responsible." The room did not move. The clock did not stop. The ventilation system continued its low mechanical breathing. But something shifted inside me. Not a crack, not a collapse, but a rearrangement. The way bones shift after they have been set. Painful and necessary, aimed at something that might eventually resemble being straight. "She knew," I said. "She knew before anyone. Your grandmother spent 31 years in an emergency room, Camille. She knew how to read a chart, and she knew how to read a lie. She told me once that Jolene's story never added up. The timeline was wrong. The withdrawal was filed on a Monday. You were in the anatomy lab that entire day. Estelle pulled the lab sign-in sheet from a friend who still worked at the university. Your name was on it. 14 hours. You could not have been at the registrar's office because you were elbow-deep in a cadaver." I closed my eyes. I could see Grandma Estelle at her kitchen counter, flour on her wrists, the silver watch on the windowsill, catching afternoon light. I could hear her voice, "Time keeps a record, and records do not forget." She had kept the record. Not for revenge. Estelle did not believe in revenge. She believed in accuracy. She believed that the truth was a patient thing, quieter than a lie, but more durable, and that eventually the patient thing wins, because it does not need anyone to believe in it. It simply waits. "There's one more thing," Corinne said. The envelope also contains a trust deed. The house on Birch Lane Estelle put it into a trust years before the diagnosis. The sole beneficiary is you, Camille. Not Kenneth, not Lorraine, not Jolene, you. The trust is held by Margot Kessler, and it has never been dissolved. $340,000. That was the assessed value of the house on Birch Lane, a 3-bedroom colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, where Estelle had taught me to scrub in using a garden hose and a kitchen timer. The house where I had held the silver watch for the first time. The house where she had looked at me across a flour-dusted counter and said, "You are going to be a surgeon." Lorraine had been trying to access that property for 2 years. She had called attorneys, filed inquiries, sent Kenneth to the county clerk's office. Every attempt had bounced back with the same answer. The trust is irrevocable. The trustee is not authorized to release information to non-beneficiaries, and the beneficiary's identity is sealed. That's why Lorraine has been so angry about the house, I said. Your mother has been angry about a lot of things for a very long time, Corinne said. The house is just the one she can put a price tag on. I stood up. I walked to the window. The snow had started thin scattered flakes that dissolved the moment they touched the parking lot asphalt. Not a storm, a suggestion. The kind of snow that does not accumulate but reminds you that winter is serious and patient and not going anywhere. Corinne, I said, I need to speak with Margot Kessler. I know, Corinne said. I already called her. She's been waiting for this call for 2 years. She said, and I am quoting her exactly, "Your grandmother instructed me to open the envelope when Camille was ready. The only condition was that Camille had to be the one to ask." I pressed my forehead against the glass. It was cold. The cold felt like clarity. It was sharp and specific, the opposite of the formless heaviness I had been carrying since 9:51 that evening, when Jolene's face appeared on my stretcher. "Tell her I'm asking," I said. Corinne was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Your grandmother would be very proud of you tonight, Camille. Not because you saved Jolene, because you called." I hung up. I sat back down on the couch. The coffee machine gurgled again like it had been waiting for the conversation to end before it started. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Corinne had texted me. It rang 3 times. "Margot Kessler," a voice said. Clear and professional, the voice belonged to a woman who answered at 2:40 in the morning because she had promised someone now dead she would keep watch. "Ms. Kessler, my name is Camille Harlow. Estelle Harlow was my grandmother." "I know who you are, Dr. Harlow," Margot said. "I've been holding an envelope with your name on it for 5 years. Can you meet me at St. Albans tomorrow morning?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Bring your hospital ID. And Dr. Harlow, you may want to make sure your family is still in the building." I did not sleep that night. Not because I was angry, because for the first time in 5 years, I was not the only one who knew the truth. Morning arrived the way mornings arrive in hospitals, not with sunlight, but with shift changes. The night nurses handed off their charts. The day nurses tied fresh scrubs and checked their assignments. The cafeteria opened at 6. The smell of burned coffee and reheated oatmeal drifted through the corridors, like a low, persistent apology for the night before. I had not slept. I had showered in the residence locker room at 4:30, changed into clean scrubs, and clipped the silver watch back to my pocket. I checked on Jolene at 5:15. She was still sedated breathing on her own vitals, stable pressure 108/64 heart rate, 86 oxygen saturation, 97%. The drain from her surgical site had collected 42 milliliters of serosanguinous fluid overnight. Expected. Unremarkable. The body does its repair work in silence, the same way it does everything important. Theo was at the nurse's station when I came out of the recovery unit. "You were here all night," he said, not a question. "Long case," I said. He looked at me the way he always did. He had the uncluttered directness of someone who had never been taught to read between the lines because nobody in his life had ever written between them. "You okay, Dr. Harlow?" "I will be," I said. Margot Kessler arrived at 8:14. I saw her through the glass panel of the surgical waiting room door before she saw me. She was tall and in her late 50s with gray hair cut short and practical. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been to more courtrooms than most lawyers. She walked the way people walk when they know exactly where they are going and have known for a long time. I met her in the hallway. Her handshake was firm and brief and completely without ceremony. "Dr. Harlow," she said, "your grandmother described you very accurately. She said you would be calm." She taught me how I said. Margot looked at the briefcase in her hand. "I have carried this envelope for 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Your grandmother gave it to me on a Wednesday afternoon in my office. She was wearing a gray cardigan. She apologized for the loose button, and she sat in my client chair for 47 minutes without once raising her voice. She told me everything. The withdrawal form, the handwriting, the Thanksgiving dinner, the 5 years of silence." Margot paused. "She also told me she was beginning to forget things and that she needed someone to remember on her behalf." I did not trust myself to speak. I nodded. "She had one instruction," Margot continued. "The envelope opens when Camille asks. Not before, not on anyone else's authority. Yours." "I'm asking," I said, "and my family is in the waiting room." "I know," Margot said. "I saw them on my way in." Kenneth and Lorraine were in the same chairs they had occupied the night before. Kenneth by the window, Lorraine closest to the nurse's station. But there was a third person now. Corinne sitting 2 chairs from Lorraine with her coat folded in her lap and her hands resting on top of it, composed, watchful a woman who had spent 58 years being underestimated and had long since stopped minding. She looked at me when I walked in and gave me a nod so small that only someone watching for it would have seen it. Dr. Samuels was in the hallway reviewing post-op notes. He glanced up when Margot and I passed. I did not ask him to come in. I did not need to. He followed the way experienced doctors do when they sense something clinical is about to turn personal. Lorraine looked at Margot the way she looked at anyone she could not immediately categorize. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is Margot Kessler," I said. "She is an attorney. She has something that belongs to this family." "We have a lawyer," Lorraine said. "We don't need another one." "This one isn't yours, Lorraine," Corinne said from her chair. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "This one is Estelle's." Lorraine turned to Corinne with an expression I recognized from 30 years of family dinners, the expression she reserved for people she considered irrelevant, who had suddenly made themselves visible. "Estelle has been gone for 2 years, she said. "Whatever this is, it can wait until Jolene is awake." "It has waited 5 years, Margot said. She set her briefcase on the low table between the chairs, opened the class 2 small metallic clicks that sounded louder than they should have in that room, and removed a manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, old-fashioned, deliberate. Estelle's name was written in the upper left corner, in handwriting I recognized, from the note that still hung on my bathroom mirror. "Mrs. Harlow," Margot said, addressing Lorraine. "I was retained by Estelle Harlow on September 14th, 2021, to act as trustee of her estate and custodian of certain documents she wished to preserve. She gave me specific instructions regarding the timing and manner of their disclosure." Margot broke the wax seal. The sound was small, dry, final. "I will read her letter first." The room was still. Kenneth stood by the window. Lorraine sat rigid. Corinne folded her hands. Dr. Samuels leaned against the doorframe with his chart closed. The 2 nurses at the station behind the glass had stopped typing. 7 people in a beige waiting room with a muted television and a vending machine and the faint smell of floor cleaner, listening to a dead woman tell the truth. Margot unfolded the letter. It was 2 pages, handwritten in blue ink, the penmanship precise and slightly slanted to the right the way Estelle's always was. "To whomever is present when this is read," Margot began. "My name is Estelle Harlow. I was a nurse for 31 years. I raised 1 son, Kenneth, and I loved 2 granddaughters. I am writing this because one of them has been wronged, and the other has done the wronging, and I will not leave this world without putting the record straight." Lorraine's hand moved to the armrest of her chair. She gripped it the way patients grip the rails of a gurney, reflexive, involuntary. Her body braced against information it had not yet received, but already expected would hurt. Margot continued. "On March 14th, 2021, A withdrawal form was filed at the medical school in Camille's name. Camille did not file that form. She was in the anatomy laboratory from 7 in the morning until 9 in the evening. I obtained the sign-in log through a colleague at the university. Her name appears 14 times across 14 hours of documented lab work. Margot reached into the envelope and removed a photocopy. She placed it on the table, the withdrawal form side by side with a second document. I commissioned a handwriting analysis from a certified forensic document examiner in Ridgemont. Margot read from Estelle's letter. The withdrawal form filed on March 14, 2021 was not signed by Camille Harlow. The signature formation, pen pressure, and letter spacing are consistent with the known handwriting samples of my younger granddaughter, Jolene Harlow. Probability of match 94.7%. The room did not explode. What happens is slower and worse. A silence thickens like ice on a lake, each second adding another layer until the surface can hold nothing more. Kenneth turned from the window. His face had gone the color of the walls, beige and washed out. He looked like a man who had just heard the foundation crack beneath the house he chose not to inspect. "That's not possible," Lorraine said, but her voice had lost its courtroom register. It was smaller now, thinner, the voice of someone speaking from inside a building that is already on fire. "There is more," Margot said, and she said it without apology and without satisfaction. She said it the way a surgeon says, "We need to go deeper," not because she wants to, but because the wound requires it. Estelle's letter continues. "I believe Jolene filed this form to conceal her own academic dismissal. Jolene was expelled from the pre-medical program on March 8, 2021, for academic integrity violations, specifically submitting falsified laboratory results in 2 courses. Rather than disclose this to the family, she manufactured a narrative in which Camille was the one who left, and she positioned herself as the loyal daughter who tried to intervene." Margot placed a second photocopied document on the table. The disciplinary record from the university, addressed to Jolene Harlow, dated March 8th, 6 days before the withdrawal form was filed. Lorraine looked at the documents the way you look at an X-ray that shows exactly what you did not want to see. She did not touch them. She stared at them the way she might stare at a stain on a white tablecloth, with the particular horror of a woman whose entire identity depended on surfaces remaining clean. Kenneth," she said, "and Kenneth, say something." Kenneth looked at Lorraine, then at me, then at the documents on the table. His mouth opened. I saw the same motion I had seen at the front door 5 Thanksgivings ago. The same motion I had seen through the waiting room glass 6 hours ago, the muscles of speech engaging and then retreating. A man perpetually on the threshold of words he could not bring himself to cross. "I should have asked," he said. 4 words, quiet, directed at no one and everyone. "You should have asked 5 years ago," Lorraine said, and her voice broke on the number. The way glass breaks on a counter's edge, not shattered, but cracked along a line that had been there all along, waiting for the right pressure in the right place. If you've ever watched the truth walk into a room and do the work that no person was brave enough to do, please hit subscribe. This story is almost finished, but the most important part is still coming. "You are blaming me," Kenneth said. He turned to Lorraine fully now, his body angled away from the window for the first time since I had entered the room. "You are blaming me. You chose to believe Jolene. You organized the dinner. You made the speech. You told everyone she wasn't cut out for it. Those were your words, Lorraine. Yours." "Because you let me believe it," Lorraine said. "You sat at that table and you said nothing. You said nothing for 5 years. You never wanted to hear anything else." They stood 3 feet apart in a hospital waiting room. They spoke with the brittle formality of strangers who had just discovered that the person they'd slept beside for 34 years was someone they did not recognize. Corinne sat in her chair, her hands still folded, watching. Dr. Samuel stood in the doorframe, his chart against his chest, his face professionally neutral. The nurses behind the glass had not resumed typing. I had not moved. I had not spoken since introducing Margot. The documents were on the table. The letter was in Margot's hands. The truth was in the room, standing where it had always stood, quiet, precise, patient, as a silver watch in a surgeon's pocket. Margot folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope with the photocopies. She closed the briefcase. "There is one additional matter," she said. "Estelle Harlow established an irrevocable trust for the property at 47 Birch Lane. The sole beneficiary is Camille Harlow. The trust was executed on June 2, 2020, and it has never been modified, dissolved, or contested. The assessed value of the property is $340,000. Lorraine looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something in her face that was not performance. It was not anger or disappointment, nor the careful arrangement of emotions she wore like a second set of clothes. It was recognition. The raw, undecorated recognition of a woman who has just realized that the daughter she dismissed built a life she cannot reach and inherited a house she cannot touch. I looked back at her. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not say any of the things I had imagined saying during the nights I could not sleep, and the mornings I could not eat, and the holidays I spent alone with a dog who did not care whether I was a surgeon or a dropout, only whether I would scratch behind his ears. "You're right, Mom," I said. "One of us wasn't cut out for it. The paperwork finally agrees." I stood up. I straightened my badge. I walked out of the waiting room and down the hallway. 112 steps. I did not look back. Jolene woke up 3 hours later. By then, everyone in that room had already chosen a side. 3 weeks passed. 21 days, 504 hours. I know, because I counted them the way I count everything precisely deliberately, the way Grandma Estelle taught me to count seconds, on a watch that ticked one beat too loud. Jolene was discharged on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the surgery. I signed her discharge papers myself. I wrote the post-operative instructions in the same handwriting I used for every patient. Clear, legible, stripped of anything personal. Activity restrictions for 6 weeks. No driving for 2. Follow-up appointment in 14 days with the general surgery clinic, not with me. I checked that box on purpose. There is a difference between saving someone's life and volunteering to stand in their orbit while they figure out what to do with it. She was awake when I made my final rounds in her room. The bruising on her face had faded from purple to a yellowish green that mapped the exact path of her cheekbone against the passenger window. She was sitting up in bed, her hospital gown folded neatly over her shoulders, the way Lorraine would have folded it, appearance first, comfort second. "Camille," she said. I looked at her chart. Hemoglobin 11.2, up from 7.8 on admission. Drain removed on day 6. Wound healing without complication. The body does not keep score. It repairs whatever is torn and moves forward, because moving forward is the only direction biology understands. "Your labs look good," I said. "You'll need to follow up on the platelet count in 3 weeks. Without a spleen, you're more vulnerable to certain infections, so we'll discuss vaccination boosters at your outpatient visit." "Camille," she said again, quieter this time, the voice of someone who wants to say something large but only has permission for something small. I looked at her. My sister, 29 years old, pharmaceutical sales, the girl who had sat by the window with a textbook open so people could see her studying. She had forged my signature on a withdrawal form. She watched me disappear for 5 years without ever calling to tell the truth. She looked smaller than I remembered. Hospitals do that to people. They strip away the performance, the wardrobe, the carefully managed angles, and leave behind the actual dimensions of a person who has run out of room to pretend. "I know you're not ready to hear this," she said, "but I'm sorry." I did not respond to the apology, not because I did not hear it, because an apology delivered from a hospital bed is not an apology, not when it comes 9 days after the person who saved your life turns out to be the one who dismantled it. It is a reflex. The body says sorry the way it says ouch automatically without consultation because the nerve has been touched and the signal travels faster than thought. "Your discharge nurse will go over everything," I said. I placed the chart back in the slot at the foot of her bed. "Take care of yourself, Jolene." I left the room. The hallway was 73 steps to the elevator. I walked them without pausing. Kenneth sent a text message 4 days after the reveal. I was at home sitting on the kitchen floor with Copper's head in my lap, eating leftover pad thai out of the container. because the couch felt too far away and the floor felt like the right altitude for the kind of tiredness I was carrying. My phone buzzed on the counter. One line, no punctuation, sent at 11:19 at night. It is the hour when people who cannot sleep finally say the thing they have been rehearsing since sunrise. I should have asked. I should have listened. I am sorry, Camille. I read it twice. I put the phone down. Copper sighed the way dogs sigh with his entire body, a full-length exhale that started at his ears and ended at his tail. I scratched behind his ears and stared at the kitchen cabinet across from me, the second shelf where I kept a box of Earl Grey tea and a jar of honey. Nothing there could help me decide what to do with 4 sentences from a man who had spent 5 years choosing silence over his own daughter. Lorraine did not send a message. She did not call. Corinne told me during our Sunday call that Lorraine had not left the house in 6 days. She canceled her book club, Corinne said. She canceled her volunteer shift at the hospital auxiliary. Mrs. Fielding from the neighborhood association called to check on her, and Lorraine told her she had the flu. She doesn't have the flu, I said. No, Corinne said. She has the truth, and it is making her sicker than any virus I have ever seen. The ripples moved outward, the way ripples do in circles that grow wider and thinner until they reach the edges of everything they can touch. Dr. Samuels told me carefully during a Tuesday morning briefing that 3 members of the hospital auxiliary board had asked him about the incident in the surgical waiting room. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. A beige room with a muted television and 7 witnesses is not a vault. Words that are spoken in the presence of nurses travel at the speed of a hospital, which is faster than light and less forgiving. Lorraine's reputation, the reputation she had built over 3 decades of charity galas and committee chairs, and the careful pronunciation of Dr. Harlow's wife, developed a crack that no amount of cancellation could seal. People knew. Not all of them and not all of the details, but enough. Enough to change the angle of a greeting in the grocery store, enough to shorten a conversation at the pharmacy, enough to make a woman who had lived her entire life in the gaze of others suddenly aware that the gaze had shifted and she could not control where it landed. Kenneth started therapy. Corinne told me this without commentary, which was itself a commentary. He went every Thursday at 4 o'clock to an office on Chestnut Street alone, and he did not tell Lorraine where he was going. I did not know what he discussed in those sessions. I did not need to know. What mattered was that he went, that the man who had spent 34 years standing beside things without facing them had finally turned around. Jolene applied for a transfer to her company's regional office in Charlotte, 712 miles from St. Albans. She did not tell the family before she applied. She did not ask for permission or input or the kind of group deliberation that Lorraine treated as a constitutional requirement. She applied, she was accepted, and she told Corinne in a voicemail that lasted 41 seconds. I need distance, she said. Not from Camille. From the version of myself that I was when I was close. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Corinne played it for me over the phone, holding her cell up to the receiver, the way people do when technology is not the point and the words are. Jolene's voice sounded different, not the polished window seat voice I remembered, but something raw, less arranged, the voice of a person who has recently discovered that performance has a weight, and she has been carrying it since she was 22 years old. I did not call her back, not yet. On a Friday evening, 3 weeks and 2 days after the reveal, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea and called Corinne. I've been thinking about what happens next, I said. I know you have, Corinne said. You've been thinking about it since the moment you walked out of that waiting room. I'm not closing the door, I said, but I need them to understand something. I'm the one who decides when it opens, how wide, and who walks through. What are your conditions? Corinne asked, as though she had been waiting for this sentence the way Margot had been waiting for the envelope with patience, without presumption, knowing it would arrive when it was ready and not a moment before. Therapy, I said. Real therapy, not the kind where you go once and tell everyone you've done the work. Kenneth has started. Good. Lorraine needs to start. Jolene too, wherever she ends up. I took a breath. And I need a letter, not a text message, not a voicemail, a letter. written by hand, sent to my address, explaining what happened and why, from each of them, separately. I don't want a family statement. I want 3 individual truths. And if they do all of that, Corinne asked, then we start over, from the beginning. No family dinners with 14 people and a script. No pretending the last 5 years were a misunderstanding. Coffee first, one person at a time, in a place I choose. Corinne was quiet for 6 seconds. Your grandmother would say, that sounds exactly right, she said. My grandmother would say I waited too long, I said. No, Corinne said. She would say you waited exactly long enough. I did not know if they would meet those conditions, but for the first time the conditions were mine to set. 2 months later, a Sunday morning in February. It was the kind of morning that arrived slowly, as if the day had decided there was no rush and the light could take its time finding the windows. I stood at the kitchen counter in my apartment, cracking eggs into a bowl. 4 eggs, a splash of vanilla, a pinch of cinnamon measured with my fingers, the way Grandma Estelle used to. Not because the recipe required imprecision, but because some things are better when the hands remember what the mind has forgotten. The bread was thick-cut brioche from the bakery on Linden Street, the one that opens at 6 and smells like butter and patience. French toast, Sunday tradition. The only ritual I had built in 5 years that did not require an operating room or a pair of gloves. Owen was setting the table. He moved around the kitchen the way he moved through everything quietly and without announcement, placing forks, knives, and napkins where they didn't need fixing. He had been in my life for 14 months. We met in the hospital cafeteria on a Wednesday when he sat across from me and said, "You look like someone who takes her coffee seriously." I told him I took everything seriously. He said, "That must be exhausting." It was the first time in years someone had seen that weight and not asked me to put it down or explain it. He just saw it. And then he poured me a second cup. 4 plates again. I asked even though I already knew the answer. Owen shrugged. "Hope is cheap," he said. "Plates are $12. I can afford both." Copper lifted his head at the sound of Owen's voice and thumped his tail once. "See," Owen said. "Copper votes yes." He set 4 plates on the table, 2 for us, 2 empty. He did this every Sunday without being asked and without explanation, the way you leave a porch light on for someone who has not come home yet, but might. Copper was under the table, chin on his paws, watching the bread with the solemn concentration of a dog who has learned that patience near a stove is occasionally rewarded. His tail thumped once against the floor when I looked down at him. Once. A single measured thump. Even my dog understood economy. The silver watch sat on the counter beside the stove, not clipped to a scrub pocket, not sealed in a wooden box or tucked inside a briefcase. It sat catching the gray winter light from the window above the sink. Its second hand ticked 1 beat too loud the way it had during 31 years of emergency room night shifts, 14 years in my grandmother's kitchen, and 5 years in my pocket during surgeries that saved people who would never know its sound. Outside, the snow was falling. Not the thin, suggestive snow from the night of Jolene's surgery, but real snow-slow, heavy flakes that accumulated on the fire escape railing, and the rooftop across the street, and the branches of the oak tree in the courtyard below, a tree I had watched through every season since I moved in, and that looked best in winter when its architecture was visible, and its strength did not need leaves to prove itself. I dipped the first slice of brioche into the egg mixture and laid it in the pan. The butter hissed. The kitchen filled with the smell of caramelizing sugar and warm bread and cinnamon, and for a moment, just a moment, I was 14 years old, standing at Grandma Estelle's counter, holding a silver watch, while she told me that time keeps a record, and records do not forget. "Owen," I said, "do you think people can start over?" He was pouring orange juice into 2 glasses, holding the carton with both hands because it was full and he did not like to spill. He thought about the question the way he thought about everything, with the specific stillness of a man who believes that answers given too quickly are usually the wrong ones. "I think they can start again," he said. "Starting over means erasing what happened. Starting again means building something new, with the full weight of what happened still in the room." He set the carton down. "Which one are you asking about?" "The second one," I said. He nodded. He did not ask who. He did not ask why today. He placed a glass of orange juice beside each plate and sat down at the table, and the snow continued to fall outside the window, like a slow white punctuation at the end of a sentence I had been writing for 5 years. My phone buzzed on the counter next to the watch. I turned it over. One notification, a text from Kenneth. I looked at the screen. I did not open it. Not yet. I set the phone face down beside the watch, the two of them side by side, the old technology and the new, both keeping time in their own way, both waiting for me to decide what to do with what they held. 3 handwritten letters had arrived in the past 2 weeks. I kept them in the drawer beside my bed under a copy of Netter's Atlas of Human Anatomy and a photo of Grandma Estelle on the porch of the blue house on Birch Lane. In the photo, she stood with her arms crossed and her chin raised, the faintest suggestion of a smile that said she knew something you did not, and would tell you when she was ready. Kenneth's letter was 4 pages. His handwriting was compressed and forward-leaning, the kind doctors develop until only those who read it every day can follow it. He wrote about the Thanksgiving dinner. He wrote about the front door. He wrote about the word "drive safe" and how he had meant to say something else, but the something else had a shape his mouth could not make. He wrote, "I chose silence because silence felt like neutrality. I understand now that silence is a choice and every choice has a side, and mine was the wrong one." Jolene's letter was 2 pages. It arrived from Charlotte in a plain white envelope with no return address, as if she were not sure she had earned the right to be found. She did not explain why she had forged the withdrawal form. She did not offer context or justification or the kind of backstory that rearranges blame into something more comfortable. She wrote, "I was afraid, not of failing, of you succeeding. Because if you succeeded, then the version of me that Mom built would collapse, and I did not know who I was without it." At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, she had added, "You saved my life twice, once on the table, once by leaving the door open." Lorraine's letter arrived last, 1 page. The handwriting was immaculate, each letter formed with the precision of a woman who understood that presentation was the last thing she had control over. She did not say, "I was wrong." She said, "I believed what I needed to believe because the alternative meant that I had failed both of my daughters in different ways. I am beginning to understand that I did. It was not an apology. It was an admission. And in a family where the truth had been buried under 5 years of silence and performance and carefully arranged portraits, an admission was a place to start." I had not replied to any of them. Not yet. The letters sat in the drawer closed while the snow fell outside and the French toast browned in the pan. Copper sighed under the table, and Owen sat across from me with his orange juice, his patience, and the 2 empty plates waiting for people who might or might not come. I flipped the toast. Golden brown, the edges slightly crisp, the center soft. I plated 2 slices for Owen, 2 for me. The empty plates stayed where they were. Not set for ghosts, set for possibilities. Now I want to talk to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening from, whatever kitchen you are standing in right now. If you have ever been the quiet one, the person who carried the weight without being asked and set it down without being thanked, the one who was told she was not enough by people who never once measured her correctly, I want you to hear this. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the life you built in their absence. You do not owe forgiveness on a timeline that is not yours. And you do not owe silence to a family that turned your quiet into proof that you had nothing to say. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. The person who holds the key is the one who built the door, not the one who knocked it down. If you have ever been the invisible one who built something real while the world looked away, share your story below. I read every single one. Like and subscribe if this spoke to you today. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are still standing in that kitchen, still holding that weight, still waiting for someone to ask how you are, set it down. Not because they asked, because you decided. The truth does not shout. It waits, patient as a silver watch in a surgeon's pocket for the day someone stops being afraid.